Good morning and welcome to MRP Recommendations screen and part and routing fields that impact those recommendations. My name is Patti Nowak and welcome to Control+M Presents. I'm the owner of Control+M Solutions. We're a Plex partner with on average about 9 years experience per consultant. I myself have about 13 years of Plex experience and I love to share what I know. Today will be the first in a number of sessions we're going to do with MRP. We're going to go into the part and the routing fields and see how those fields impact the recommendation screen, starting at a very basic level. People think MRP is confusing or challenging, but it's really not. It's just a list of mathematical equations that layer on top of one another. And as soon as you figure out how they work, you're going to find this one amazing tool. Now, some of this might be really basic to you, but I bet if you'll stick around, you'll learn something. So like I said, this is the first in a series of MRP sessions my team is going to be talking about in the coming months. And at the end here, we'll talk about some additional subjects that we're going to talk about, and we'll let you give some feedback on what you'd like to see next. So for now, sit back and enjoy as we dive into MRP. First things first, we're only going to work with screenshots today, but we're going to jump into live once. Why? Well, because it takes a little bit of time to generate MRP after we make all these part and routing changes for you to see the impact. And even if it's only a minute or two, we'd be sitting here for a while if we went through 12 different examples with changes and generate MRP each time. That could be an hour of chugging, and no one's got time for that. It's always important to know your data, and I'm going to start by keeping mine very simple. I know yours is going to be more complex, but it's best when we're learning to start out simply. We're going to use a part that is a one operation part, a single operation part that's got 10 days on the lead time of the part record. Here's our routing data. We don't have any setup time. We can make 1,000 pieces an hour. And we have a BOM item that it's got a 3-day lead time on the part record. Now, on the BOM routing, we have an 8-day approved supplier lead time. Now, I know that doesn't make much literal sense. You wouldn't put a part lead time in for something if your supplier can't deliver it for 8. But you're going to see throughout these presentations that having these numbers be unique really does help diagnose problems. We're also going to have a customer order in our system for 10,000 pieces due November 30th. No jobs, no inventory, no supplier POs yet. That's the best way to learn. No complications. Also, I don't have any other demand for BOM parts on this part either. So we want to make things nice and easy to learn. So we're going to talk about MRP and PRP, how they fit together, and let's level set. Most of you probably know this, but a refresher never hurts. MRP and PRP tell you when you need to complete things, not when you need to start them. On the front MRP screen, MRP says, you need these parts in inventory by this date. The recommendation screen, or the second screen in, will tell you when you have to buy it. And we'll see that soon. And don't forget, MRP is limited to purchase parts. It won't show subassemblies. MRP gets a lot of data from PRP, so it's good to know how they both work, but we're going to stay mostly in MRP today. When diagnosing MRP, I have a few tips. Number one, start with a clean slate if you can. Head over to test and get rid of all your inventory, jobs, and orders, and generate MRP. When it's clean, when you see absolutely no demand, no inventory, and you see zeros everywhere, you're ready to begin. Then start adding your complications in one at a time. And you will see that when you can explain every number in every variable, then it's time to add the next one. Don't add variables until you understand the one that you did before. Repeat until everything makes sense. Remember, standard rules of testing tell you if you dump in all the variables at once, it's pretty tough to diagnose. So, you can run MRP by different buckets or windows. You can run them by days or weeks or months, and each is really for a different purpose. Note that PRP can only be run by days or weeks. And in Classic or UX, you can only go up to 52 buckets for your PCN. You can go ahead and put in more than 52, but Plex is only going to show 52 anyway. And you can default these bucket quantities in your PCN if you want, and in UX, you can store your own defaults. Every bucket starts with a past due, which is essentially before today. When I'm testing, I like to manipulate my dates to pull them in far enough so that the impicks are easy to see in one screen, but not so far that we have past due, because past due is hard to diagnose. If you see quantities in there, but if there's more than one demand that's past due, it's tougher to diagnose. So save that for when you're a little bit of a pro at MRP. And some of you can only see very plain options for excess and requirements. You might see a box that says excess only or requirements only. So check out the setting requirement limit display. It's going to enable some pull downs to let you choose the requirements and excess options in a more granular way. Also, remember that you can have a part that shows in both excess and requirements. For example, if you're short in bucket 1 and heavy in bucket 10, the same part will show up both as a requirement and an excess. Okay, now let's dig in a little bit to everyone's favorite, net demand or parent demand. There are a number of types of net demand out here. We're going to stick with regular net or parent demand. It's best to learn this one first because they all behave the same. Why is it called parent demand sometimes? Well, there's a net line in MRP and people get confused. I'm not a big fan of glossarization, but this is a really good one to consider. See the net line and the total net line? That's why it's nice to change net demand to parent demand because it's easier to talk about it. The total net line also is a pretty cool feature because if you filter for more than one purchased part item, it'll net them together. It's really great for using for checking out multiple revisions. Now let's see how our data from a few screens ago plays out with net demand. Remember our condition here, what we have now, we're going to be able to see where net demand comes up with these numbers. Our current condition is a release for 10,000 pieces due November 30th. Our lead time on our finished good, which is called one op part, is 10 days. So MRP is going to drive in net demand on November 20th. Remember, net demand can't consider the work center calendar or supplier days because we don't have a job, so we don't know what work center to use. And MRP's front screen doesn't know what supplier we're buying from. We could pay more for fast delivery, or we could save money with a standard supplier. So net demand relies heavily on those finished good part lead times. Speaking of lead times, they can really make a huge impact, not just on MRP, but also on PRP and especially the finite scheduler. And they're on the routing and at the part level. Each one has its own purpose. And we can complicate them by adding things like transit time, which we won't get into today due to the length of our presentation, but that's a useful tool too. But if you're not careful, you can double your lead times, especially if you have multiple assemblies that turn into a finished goods. And that can get you into serious trouble with the scheduling engines. Since we're talking about MRP today, though, we're going to stay focused on it. But some of the things I show you here will impact the rest of your scheduling engine parts. So back to lead times. How do you know which ones are being used? Well, what do we always say? There are millions of ways to configure Plex, and we can't know all of your settings or setup tables. So diagnosing them can take time. I can always do it, but I never know how long it'll take. That's why it's good for you to learn these building blocks so you can peel back the onion and diagnose yours. Because when bringing in multiple sub-assemblies and multiple level routings, well, knowing this will really help you save your company money. So looking at our net demand, it's calculating exactly as expected. Our order for finished goods is due November 30th, and we have a 10-day lead time on the finished good part. The net demand says, I don't know why you haven't created a job for this, but you're going to. And when you do, we're going to need parts. And because there's no job quantity or due date to blow through the routing to get the job start date, the MRP has to use the finished good lead time. It assumes that since you told us it takes 10 days to make these, we're going to start 10 days before that. So let's make sure our BOM items are here when we need them, which is November 20th. And we can see that 10,000 demand detail by clicking on the 10,000 hyperlink. While we know this is working exactly as expected, this screen can be a little bit confusing. What it's telling us is we have a finished good part demand type of ship schedule. That is one of the options in our customer release type table in my PCN. And these are different from most PCNs because it's a user configurable table. You can call it whatever you want. So if your release types are named something that your planner doesn't understand, he or she may be confused. Even worse yet, if your release type is called forecast, it's easy to get confused by this versus the actual Plex forecast module. So make sure your planner knows where this is coming from. The order quantity multiplied by the BOM quantity at that routing step, which in our case is a one-for-one relationship, tells us that we need 10,000 pounds of bacon to make this part. The upstream due date is the customer release date, and the due date is the demand date minus the finished good part lead time to tell us when we need to have the parts by. So far, so good? All right, let's start complicating things. We'll start by creating a job, and let's pretend there's no scrap. That's always best. Few complications, right? And our order is due November 30th. Now, in the US, we don't work on Thanksgiving, or most people don't work the day after. So those are set as off days in our Work Center calendar. And jobs, as you know, respect the Work Center calendar. By the way, if you haven't updated your Work Center calendar and shifts for next year, you need to keep those updated all the time. Updates that are made to the Work Center calendar today will only impact future scheduled jobs, meaning jobs that were scheduled after the change is made. It's not recursive if you use the infinite planning engine, but there is an exchange out in the community requesting a mass reschedule. Anyway, if we have our job due date be November 30th and we're off the 26th and the 27th, our job says we have to start on the 24th. So our job bombs will now be due November 24th once the job is entered. Let's take a peek and see if I'm right. Again, once that job is created, the demand moves from parent demand to job demand. And you can always just click on the demand to see the details. This tells us to bring in the BOM items on the job start date. That's pretty clear. But wait, I'm going to manipulate things to show what people sometimes call double dipping in MRP. And I hate that because that's not what's happening, even though it might be what it looks like happening. Let me explain why. This is probably the most frequently asked question I get about MRP. People think MRP is doubling demand, but it's not. So let's set up the condition that I find behind this at least 99% of the time. A job has been created to fulfill demand that is not due to complete before the order due date. For example, if we have an order due on Tuesday and a job due on Thursday. Now, how does this happen? Well, typically either a customer pulls in an order, but the job isn't updated, or we know we can't get materials, so we push the job out. And what it's doing is really leading us to lie to Plex. It means we're telling Plex that we're going to ship something on Tuesday that's not going to exist on Thursday until Thursday. And that can't be. Just like Plex won't let parts inventory go negative, just like you can't let real inventory go negative, you can't ship things that don't exist yet. So Plex says, look, I don't know what this Thursday job is all about, and I don't really care. But you need parts on Tuesday and you don't have a job to fulfill them. So I'm going to recommend you buy parts so you can make that job for Tuesday. And that makes logical sense. You want to know how to get around it? Tell Plex the truth. What do I always say about Plex? She's like your mom. If you lie to her, she'll know and you're going to pay the price. And the price is buying too much. Now, you may have noticed that the screenshots before this have to be chopped up to fit. So to show this, I'm going to pull them in a little bit. I needed those dates to be later in the month so that you would see the impact of the Work Center calendar on the past screen, and I could beg you to update that and keep it updated. Again, that should be part of your annual maintenance. Anyway, to make things easier, I'm putting the order due November 12th and our job due the 13th, one day late. And that's going to mimic what people think is double dipping. Also note, I had to force the lead time on this finished good to match to make them look like they were in the same buckets. I really want you to see what your planners see, even if it means we have to change our data a little bit. Now look at this MRP. It looks like it's double dipping, doesn't it? In the November 9th bucket, we have both job demand and parent demand. Your planner runs into your office claiming we're double dipping. So then we look in PRP and weekly buckets, and it also looks like we're okay. We need 10,000 pieces for an order and we're making 10,000. Why, if PRP looks okay, does MRP look like it's doubling? Your planners want answers. Well, guess what? We can give them to them. Let's drill down and show them. See, we have the order due November 12th, but the job is due November 13th. When we view this in weekly buckets, these are in the same buckets and they look okay. Switch to daily view and it's clear that we're not okay. So next time your customers come in and tell you they think it's doubling, take a peek at PRP by day. That simple act of changing our buckets to days proves that although MRP looks like it's doubling demand, it's really not. So when your planners come in and they say it's doubling, ask them, are you telling Plex the truth? You can't eat a sandwich today that won't be made until tomorrow, can you? In the same way, you can't ship parts today that aren't being made until tomorrow either. So tell Plex the truth. Change the job due date or change the order, because one of these is really what's going to happen. Either your ops guy is going to find a way to get the parts out or you're going to ship late. Why don't you just tell Plex which one you're going to do and then the double dipping goes away? And if you get told by your customer service folks that you have to store the original date on the order, that's fine. There's a setting to store that. You don't need to lose it. Okay, I'm going to manipulate some things a little bit more to show what people, what else we can do with our data here. And we're going to keep everything on one screen. We're going to continue with the job due date of November 13th. And we have a job start date of November 11th, which drives our BOM component into November 11th. And that's going to allow us to see the same things, but not have such tiny screenshots. And remember, I had to push that job out earlier. It wouldn't have let me show the Thanksgiving Work Center calendar impact. So now that we've got some better screenshots, let's start to add some more variables, and you'll see that they layer in. That's what makes diagnosing MRP a challenge. But with this session and more as we make them, you're going to see that it may be challenging, but the math is simple when you know what to look for. So our job starts November 11th. Our parts will be planned to arrive November 11th. November 11th, but that's the job start date. What if my truck doesn't arrive before the shift starts? What if I don't have time to get the parts off? Well, if you want more time for all of your purchase components, check out this setting. It's global though. It allows us to put additional lead time on every purchase component. You need to discuss this with your entire company to ask if it's a good idea for you. It can be. It'll get the inventory here early, but also it's going to slow down your inventory turns. So make sure to include your production and accounting folks in here. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's a function you should consider. You can see that once my setting for that is set to 3 days, our parts are driven in earlier. We were coming in on November 11th before the change. Now we're coming in on November 8th. And I always say be careful about using the same integer and lead time settings and the settings when you're testing, lead time fields and the settings when you're testing. One of the toughest parts about diagnosing is when you see the same lead time number in the field, it can get confusing. How do you know which one of the fields is driving it? Or worse yet, you're going to see as those start piling up, which combinations are driving them. Let's chat up minimum inventory a little bit, because minimum inventories are handled differently by the finished goods in the BOM, and they're important. We're going to start by putting 1,000-pound minimum inventory to our BOM part. Look at MRP and see the yellow? That's a suggestion to buy more because we're below min. It's not a force, just a suggestion. And again, don't be confused by the green total net. That just totals up all the parts you're filtering on, but it doesn't respect min inventory. Again, it's pretty cool for subbing parts like different revisions, and then you can run MRP for all the different revisions and see the total net line, and then you'll know when you're going to run out of the combination of minimums, of revisions. So the min on the BOM's pretty simple. Here I changed the minimum quantity at the finished good level to 1,000, same as the BOM. Let's see what happens to MRP now. After we gen MRP, we now see that we have 1,000 pounds past due demand. Well, why is it past due? Well, we told Plex that we always want to have 1,000 of our finished good parts here, and Plex knows that it takes 10 days to make those. Remember our 10-day lead time? Well, to have 1,000 pieces on hand now, we would have had to start making those 10 days ago. So that's why they're past due. And you're going to see on the next screen, that's going to impact your quantity to purchase. Now let's tap into the recommendation screen. The system is telling us that we want to buy 2,000 pounds right now per our previous slide. 1,000 for the BOM minimum inventory to fulfill the min inventory for finished goods and for the minimum inventory of the BOM. And for validation on the next screen, I just want you to see this approved supplier lead time on the process routing. This supplier takes us 8 days to get us parts. So take a peek at the recommendations screen. The order date and the due date both display. In order to receive by a given date, we have to order minus the supplier lead time. And remember, red means it's too late. So the order date and due date are shown. Order date equals approved supplier lead time, or includes the approved supplier lead time, those 8 days we saw on the previous screen. And if you have more than one supplier, you'll have additional lines on this sheet. Say we buy this from Lagaki Foods and Coke Foods. Well, they would each have their own lines, and you would get to pick which supplier to buy from. Check out the calculation note. It tells you exactly why it's recommending what it is. For this part, we're late on the min inventory for our finished goods, and we need to buy 1,000 of these for the minimum inventory of the BOM. Once we buy the 2,000 pieces, and then we use 1,000 of them to make our finished good min inventory, we will have 1,000 left. That's in the balance column. Now that calculation note is really awesome, but it can be kind of overwhelming if you have very deep parts or frequently used BOM items, because all the demand will show. It's a terrific training tool, so check the setting called Calculation Note Display. You may want to turn it on for a little while, but I'll bet your buyer's going to want it off after a while. A lot of work in there. So the next part we're going to talk about is the standard job quantity, or SJQ, on the finished good parts. A standard job quantity set at the finished goods level can blow through the finished part to drive in net demand for components if you enable the customer setting standard quantity used. Your net demand amounts will be created in multiples of the standard job quantity at the finished goods. Think of it this way. You haven't given Plex a job yet for this type of demand, so it assumes that when you do create a job, it's going to be done in the standard job quantity. After all, why else would we need that field? I've never had any one issue be such a bone of contention between departments and companies where we implement and optimize. It really depends on your focus. The production team always thinks that if we build in multiples of the standard job quantity, we might be making too many parts. But if we use the SJQ as our economic build quantity, the point at which we've quoted parts to be the most profitable, anybody concerned with profit would want you to build parts in multiples of those SJQs. So luckily for you, this is settings controlled. You get to make the decision. If this setting is on, though, make sure that you check the standard job quantity on every impacted part that's driving your BOM. So if you're making an assembly out of an assembly that's made out of an assembly, those SJQs can multiply. So I set mine to 555. Why? Well, my min inventory and customer order are not divisible by that, so I know it's going to have to round up, and it wouldn't be too much fun if all the math turned out evenly now, would it? So let's talk about the words that are shown on this screen. Parent demand went from 1,000 to 1,110. That's because our SJQ is 555 and we need 1,000. So the system believes we have to make two different jobs, or 1,110, and it's going to drive the BOM quantity there. But if you didn't know about this 555 standard job quantity, would this be obvious? No. You would still look at that minimum inventory replenishment of 1,000 and wonder where the 1,110 came from. But now that you know, you're going to look like a rock star. The system says buy 2,110, keep 1,000 for the BOM min inventory, and use up 1,110 to make 2 jobs of 555 pieces that we need to get our finished goods minimum inventory of 1,000. This is where people start getting confused. So know where your standard job quantities are set up and how they impact things, but be very careful when changing them, because this is one of the most frequently used cost algorithm fields. And you don't want to start impacting accounting because you're playing around with standard job quantities on a part. The next question we'd have to ask ourselves is, are we overdriving MRP? Well, we might be. In this case, we're making 1,110 parts for a min inventory of only 1,000. So Plex will assume in PRP that we're going to have those 110 of those laying around. And technically then, PRP would only tell us to make 10,000 parts minus those extra 110. But we already had created the job. So technically we would have excess in PRP. We're technically overdriving. There's really nothing to do here. I just wanted to show you that the SJQ, that setting, really pushes the net demand and does not change the job demand unless you've got a setting on in PRP that builds in multiples of the standard job quantity. So when we talk about the recommendation screen, we can also add things like standard order quantity and min order quantity. So let's see how they add some fun there. I added a 5,555 min order quantity onto this part. Note it's at the part, not at the supplier. This means I can't purchase fewer than 5,555 of these at a time, no matter who I buy from. Be careful with this if you use then more than one supplier or if you really aren't forced at this minimum. See, our recommendation quantity defaults to 5,555, and it's going to do that in multiples. And the balance shows we should have 4,445 left. Why that number? Well, we've told Plex that we can't buy fewer than 5,555 of these at a time, and we need 1,000 for min inventory, and we have a min inventory of our finished goods of 1,000 in multiples of the standard job quantity. So Plex thinks those 1,110 parts are going to be eaten up right away, and that's what will be left. So you can really see how things are starting to add up here. Now, let's remove that min order quantity and change our standard order quantity to 888. And it leads us to a value of 2,664. Why is it doing that? Well, remember we need 1,000 for minimum inventory and 1,110 to fulfill the finished goods min inventory. That's 2,210. If you divide 2,210 by 888 standard order quantities, that's 2.376. Plex is going to round that up to 3 standard order purchases, which is 2,664. And it still assumes we're going to use 1,110 to make those finished goods. That's why we have a balance of 1,554 left. Let's dive in a little bit to some options on the recommendations page. Recommendations days, weeks, and months are broken out to suggest when you want to automatically add information to POs. Many companies will use, for example, days of 8 to 10, weeks of 4 to 6, and months of anywhere from 3 to 12, depending on your lead time. To make this very easy to see, I have mine set to 3 of each. Today plus 3 days, which is in the yellow, 3 weeks, which are in the purple, and then 3 months in the turquoise. Those are all set by settings called recommendation unit display. And you can set them to whatever numbers you want, and it will be universal. You can also set the purchase order status. For example, on here, I'm on order until December, and after December, I'm creating releases that are at a forecast. So check those firm days out and plan days out to control status. Creating a PO from the recommendation screen. This is one of my favorite things to train people on, because when I do this, they're often surprised to see how simple it really is to do this. It's a bit confusing for some folks because if you click the wrong button, which a lot of people do, the system just takes you to create a new PO. And those folks are frustrated that they have to then type in the supplier, the part number, the date and quantity. But Plex will do this for you. And this is the one time I'm going to go into Plex live. And note it works the same in UX and Classic, even though I'll be showing UX. The buttons are named the same, they're just in different places. So let's go into Plex. And you'll see I'm in MRP here, and I'm on my part bacon. When I click on the part bacon, the recommendation screen comes up, and I need to order this many. I click here, and if I click here, what the system is doing is taking me to the create purchase order screen, and it's going to ask me to type everything in. That's the wrong thing to do. Sometimes I glossarize that button to say create a brand new PO, just to make it clearer. So let's talk about the button where it really is done. If I click here and I select this create button, the system is going to create a PO for Lagaki Foods with a quantity 5,555 of the part bacon, status of on order, due the 17th of November. It does all the work for you, pulling in the defaults from the price and the status, etc. It's really very cool. So remember this, hit the correct button to create your POs. Next up, here's a pretty cool screen in Classic that lets you add many parts to a PO at one time. It's got some limited functionality, and if you want, we can do a session on this. But since we're training on MRP, I just want to touch on this. This functionality is different between UX and Classic, so we're going to start with Classic. You can see in here that we have a filter for the week, and we can add a PO directly from here. Some folks call this a shortage report. So take a few minutes to peek at this and see if it'll work for you. In this case, I could add any of these 5 parts to the purchase order with just one click of a button. Now, the same screen exists in UX, but as you can see, we can't add to a PO here. We can only view POs from here. Notice how this demand really looks a lot like MRP. It's got job demand, parent demand, even customer releases, but you can't add to a single PO from here. Here's another similar screen that does allow you to add to PO. It might work for you. The create button is going to create a PO, but it does only based on minimums, not on job demand and parent demand. So take a few minutes, check these screens out, see what you think, and maybe they'll help your buyers today. Okay, guys, we are on the home stretch. Let's just go through a few tips here. Folks have been on Plex since before 2010 or so. Remember the days that MRP gen 3 times a day, and we had no control over when. We had to enter a case to get MRP generated if we needed a special gen. But now it's in our control. You can gen it anytime you want. And the gen really works on the parent or the net demand mostly. Our recommendations are set your auto generation on work days, at least maybe right before work or early in the morning, right around noon, and then mid-afternoon. That's going to pull in your unmet demand or your net demand regularly enough to be helpful. While MRP is generating, you're going to see a message that says MRP gen in process. If you see that, make sure you wait until the generation is complete, because I've seen the numbers literally change before my eyes, and it's a little bit disconcerting. So give it a little time. It doesn't take much. To add generations to your schedules, click MRP admin and add or edit changes your regularly scheduled MRPs, and gen creates a new one. You can generate these, like I said, as often as you want, but you really don't need it all that often. And it does generate manually very quickly. This is a really super tool. I'm very glad Plex gave us the flexibility to do that. So a couple of less frequently used MRP tools. If you want to change how you are filtering an MRP, go into MRP, jump into your settings, and anywhere you see the word filter generally means that you can probably filter MRP by that field. One of my favorite, sort of a poor man's capable to promise, is filtering by finished good part number, which I've been using this entire session. If you sell raw materials to customers, you can bring customer order demand for raw parts right into MRP. You can also filter by planner, by supplier, etc. Now, one word of warning, if you are doing MRP by building, you must be very careful because there are rules for that. And if you break the rules, you're going to create a little bit of MRP chaos. Our next session will cover how to do that. Couple of warnings about MRP drama. If you have multiple lead times on parts, routings assemblies, and subassemblies, they can pile up. Also, multiple material flags. Let's say the material flag is on for the receive and for receiving inspect operation. MRP can actually double up demand. Check out the MRP diagnostics report for help on this. Here it is in Classic. It works the same as in UX, but it's an easier screenshot in Classic. It's an awesome tool for diagnosing issues. I suggest you work with your schedulers to minimize the problems on this screen. One quick word of warning though, if you are a company that replicates parts, you may see a big number in here in active and unused parts. That may not be a problem because you may have to replicate parts out to other PCNs that don't need to be there. So these are not necessarily things that are wrong. They're just things that you need to look at. I like to stay on the screen for a while, but unfortunately we had a bit of a technical issue with this session, so I apologize for that. Our next session will be November 25th, where our Jim Porn will be talking about MRP by buildings. If you'd like to join us, please email Jill at Control+M Solutions, or you can always email me with questions as well. Thanks so much for your time, and stay happy and healthy.